The Capital Confidential podcast is brought to you by the Times-Union, the leading newspaper in New York's capital region. Subscribe today or visit online at timesunion.com.
You want to deport an undocumented person? Start with me, because I'm an undocumented person.
How do we beat him in an election?
We will. I'm going to run against him.
I wish you would. I wish you would, Dad. I would.
There are things in here that are unobjectionable because they're not that effective. So yeah, sure, I'll vote for a distinctive license plate. Sure, why not?
Jim, you had your press conference at 4 o'clock.
You're having a press conference now?
That's
You're
right.
talking?
I'm having a press conference.
Well,
now.
is this your space here or is it public?
No, it's my space.
Oh, this is your
Don't
space.
interrupt.
Okay.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is the Capital Confidential podcast. This episode explores the Child Victims Act, which would expand the statute of limitations in child sexual abuse cases so the window to bring civil and criminal cases would be expanded. The most controversial aspect of the proposal, which is championed by Governor Cuomo and the Democratic-controlled Assembly, is a one-year window that would allow victims of abuse in the past to file civil lawsuits that have passed the statute of limitations. The last component has been a major stumbling block for the bill, which is yet to receive a vote in the state Senate. The failure to have a vote motivated our guest, Gary Greenberg, a child sex abuse survivor, to back Democratic control of the state Senate for 2019. For this episode, we talked about why this is a personal fight for him, the failure to reach a compromise in the past, and what this legislation could mean if it's enacted. Enjoy the show. What does your interest in this stem from?
My interest stems from that I was, a victim of child sexual abuse at the age of 7, and it's horrendous, and, you suffer dearly, and health problems and other problems. And about 20 years ago, in 1997, I had been abused in 1967. So in 30 years after I was abused, I was watching the television, and I saw on the news that an individual by the name of Louis Van Wee had been arrested by the Troy Police Department, and they asked that if anyone had been abused in Cohoes, Watervliet, or Troy, to call them. And I had been abused at the Cohoes Memorial Hospital in 1967 when my father was a patient there by an orderly. Offered to take me on a tour of the hospital. It wasn't a tour. And I did not know the person's name. My parents went over there after I told them about it. A few months later, they wouldn't give the name of the hospital. They said they had dismissed the employee, and the police wouldn't do anything. They said juries don't believe kids. So I never knew this person's name, and I only saw him for 30 minutes, but I recognized him. I knew that was him. I went over to the Troy police, and they verified it. But they told me that there's nothing I could do because the statute of limitations had run out. And that really made me angry. And that started my involvement on changing, reforming the laws.
How did your activism begin? What did you do to start getting involved?
Well, I went down and talked to the DA at the time in Rensselaer County was Ken Bruno, and his father was the majority leader, and went down and talked to him, and at that time didn't really have any interest in changing the statute of limitations, thought they were fine, and I stayed involved for a few years and then became disgusted with it and went on with my life. And then a few years ago, I always stayed involved, around the edges, trying to, see if the legislature was interested, but Bruno never was, and then Dean Skellius never was. He was the majority leader after Bruno. And then Flanagan came in, and he wasn't interested. So a couple of years ago, the issue really started to become more out in the public eye, social media, and different groups, and they had been trying for 10 years at that time to try to get the law passed. And I said, this is enough of this. We can't come up here every year and lobby and then go home for 6 months and then come back in January. We have to get involved in these races, and we have to find senators and support them politically get senators in there who will support the Child Victims Act, and that's when I formed the Fighting for Children PAC.
And when we talk about the Child Victims Act, what is it exactly that you're referring to? What are the tenets of the bill? What do you want to see accomplished?
Well, the Child Victims Act would change the statute of limitations in New York State, which currently are the worst. We're the worst state in the country for that. Most states have overwhelmingly reformed their statute of limitations based on, the realization that, people take some time to come forward, and the average age is 50. So we want to raise the 23. The Assembly passed a bill the last couple of years that raised it to 28. I like to see it go higher. Really totally taken off, but it's definitely higher than 28 because the average victim doesn't come forward to 50. That's criminal. And then on the civil, the Assembly bill that has passed would raise it to 50, so from 23 to 50. Also in the Child Victims Act, which is the most controversial part, is the one-year look-back. So that would give any victim in New York State who has been abused in the past an opportunity to go into civil court. You can't go back criminally because it's against the Constitution, but you can civilly. The legislature can pass a window or a look back and give prior victims an opportunity to go into a civil court, either take their predator to court, or if an institution was involved, or where they enabled this and didn't do anything to protect the child, then they would also be able to sue that institution. So that's the Child Victims Act.
Why is it important to be able to sue in these cases?
Well, I think it's important because it gives accountability to a victim to finally be able to see that their predator is in a court, would face some consequences, and a lot of these predators are still in the streets because of the statute of limitations. Like I said, the average victim comes to 50. Now, my abuser had admitted to abusing 300 kids in 30 years. This shows you that the amount of abuse that is out there, and we have to get these individuals off the street. By going to court, we can do that.
You mentioned some of the Senate Majority Leaders who are opposed to this measure. What does their opposition stem from? What do they tell you is the problem with the bill?
Well, I think mainly it's the institutions, the insurance companies, the liability that if you sue a church or you sue an Orthodox Jewish organization or you sue a public school or, the Boy Scouts that, that the church they say the church would go out of business, or the schools or the Boy Scouts. And, that hasn't happened anywhere else. That it's really not money to us. What it is that, as the Pennsylvania grand jury report showed, and if you do the same report, which is going to be done, you'll see the same thing happened here, that they hid. We've always known that, and this proves it. The church, and we know the Boy Scouts and the Orthodox Jews and other organizations, they instead of you had a priest or a rabbi that was abusing, you didn't deal with it. You just moved them to another part of the country or another church or another community, and that's how you dealt with it. So, and then when that person moved to that community, those kids were abused. So, there is a sense of liability. They didn't do the right thing, and they should be held accountable, and the victim should have that opportunity. They weren't protected. People went, I went to a hospital to see my father. I didn't go there to get, my life ruined, or the same with the church. They went for church or Orthodox Jewish synagogue to get a spirituality, not to get their soul murdered.
You've mentioned the bill the Assembly passed, and I think it's probably fair to say that bill represents what a lot of the advocates want. This past session, the Senate Republicans brought forth a bill with Senator Kathy Young, which you were helping to, write, which was kind of a compromise bill. Can you tell me a little bit about that bill and how you got involved in it?
Well, I had Justin McCarthy, who I've known a long time, is a friend of mine, and he's 25 years experience working in the Senate. Now he's a consultant lobbyist, and we sat down, and then we discussed some ways possibly of getting the Republicans to the negotiating table, and Senator Young came forward we had testified. I had testified, and other advocates had testified at her budget hearing. She's the chairwoman of the Finance Committee, so she, since it was in the governor's budget for the first time ever, the Child Victims Act, we were allowed to go to the budget hearing and tell why we feel that the Child Victims Act should stay in the budget. And, Senator Young, even though it didn't stay in the budget, showed some, understood what we were, what was going on and what we wanted. She wanted to do something. So, we sat down and we came up with this bill, the Child Victims Fund, which we would create a fund from the Manhattan DA has a fund there. I think there's $800 million in it from,
seized assets.
Seized assets. So about $300 million would go into that fund, and then it would be replenished about $50 million a year. You would have hearing officers and administrative, top administrative official that would oversee it, and Tom DiNapoli, the state controller, would, oversee it, and victims would have an opportunity to go in, and file claims, and they'd be investigated, and the hearing officers would have subpoenas, so they could subpoena for the church records or any records they need and make a determination, and victims, would be paid out, and it would be had to be done within 90 days. You didn't have to go to a court, and this was open to all victims, and I felt all along that one of the problems I have with the look back is that you have to go to a civil court. So if you don't have an abuser that has any money, or if you don't have any money yourself to get a lawyer, or if there's no institution involved, a lawyer won't take your case because they want to, they need to get paid to do the depositions, and it's very expensive. So 90% of abuse is really family and non-institutional abuse. I felt those victims would be better compensated, be quicker, to be able to get funds to them. They could use that money for therapy, and which a lot of them lack. And so that's why I supported the Child Victims Fund. I also wanted to get the bill, to get the Republicans to the negotiating table. Since the Assembly had passed their bill and the governor had put his bill in the budget, I wanted the Republicans to pass this bill, and then you would have, 3 different versions, and at the end, they negotiate, and you could come up with a resolution. It would have a better chance than the Republicans not having anything. Well, lo and behold, Senator Young's bill did come out of the Finance Committee, and then it was sent to the Rules Committee, and under the rules of the legislature, Senate rules, Majority Leader Flanagan is chairman of the Rules Committee, and he would not move the bill. So he would not move his own member's bill for a vote. He would not move the Child Victims Act to the floor for a vote. So both bills died. And at that point, I had met with Flanagan, and I had told him, vote on this bill. You have to vote on the bill. This is a legitimate bill that your member came up with, has 21 Republican sponsors, and if you want to show that you're concerned about children and you're concerned about helping victims of child abuse and taking predators off the street, then you'll pass this bill. Well, he didn't, and at that point, and I decided that I can no longer, really support that bill because the conference leaders have no interest in helping us.
And what was the problem with this version of the bill? Because it didn't seem like the institutions who would be on the hook for the bills in the regular Child Victims Act would not have to pay in this bill. So what was his problem? What do you think was the reason this bill didn't advance?
The fund would still have subpoena powers, so they would still be able to go after church records and get records. So I think he had a problem with that. And I just think that they don't want to do anything. They don't want to help victims. He doesn't want to use state funds, and basically that's it. And because he doesn't want to help victims, that's the only interpretation I had.
So there seems to be pretty much wide agreement on various portions of the Child Victims Act, such as the extending the statute of limitations when it comes to criminal charges. So is there a reason why you don't think it's the right path to pass maybe individual bills that, begin to address some of these concerns, whether it's the criminal look back?
I have in the past, attempted to do that, and you can't get all the sides together to agree on, one body wants only to go to 28, and another body wants the statutes totally taken off, and there's a lot of advocates who don't want to piecemeal it. So, at this point, it would have been good if they had done that prior, but at this point, I think in this environment we're in, that you need the Child Victims Act.
You've tried to make this now a big issue for the 2018 elections. You've begun endorsing candidates for the state Senate as well as the Assembly, but I guess the Senate's really where it matters at this point. Do you have any reason to believe, though, that when voters head to the polls, that this will be a major issue for them, that this is going to be something that really could sway their ballot in tough elections?
I think it will, and what we've seen so far in the rallies that I've had around the state, been terrific turnouts, well covered, and people, from what I'm getting from the candidates as they're going door to door, they are bringing up the Child Victims Act, and a lot of people, they have children, they don't understand, why it's not being passed, why the issue. They see, what's going on with Larry Nassar, they see what's going on with the Pennsylvania grand jury report, and, they see that something has to be done, and, they're mad, they get mad. And I think, yes, that anger is going to be towards the Republicans because of their obstructionist of not only the Child Victims Act, but Child Victims Fund, and not doing anything, to help victims.
Have you gotten commitments from Senate Minority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who would be in line to take over as Majority Leader if the Democrats do win a majority, that she would bring this bill to a vote in the chamber?
Yes, I have. The first 30 days it'll be dealt with. And the governor came out yesterday and said he named it as one of his top, 11 priorities, which is a first.
And are you only going to be endorsing Democrats, do you anticipate, for this election cycle, or do you think there's some Republicans who might get your stamp of approval?
No, we cannot afford to send any Republican to the New York State Senate and vote against victims. So, no, I have no interest in supporting Republicans this cycle. Basically, what the Republicans are doing, Betty Little and Terrence Murphy and some of the other ones are coming out and saying they support the Child Victims Act. They would vote for the governor, the tougher plan now. Well, for the last 12 years, they haven't voted for anything. They've had the opportunity. Now we're in election. They're for it. That's hypocritical, and they're hypocrites because they're complaining about Governor Cuomo allowing 79 sexual offenders to vote in the state and holding 2 hearings. They never even have held a hearing on the Child Victims Act. So for them to come out and hold 2 hearings, trying to politicize, they're hypocrites. They're going to try to make political hay out of 79 sexual offenders who, if they had passed the Child Victims Act 12 years ago, might still be in prison.
And it's hard to imagine, if this bill does come to a vote, I have to believe that some of the Senate Republicans will end up voting for the bill, largely because it's probably easier to, not have a position on the bill when it's not coming up for a vote, but when it actually does reach the floor, I have to imagine it's going to pass very overwhelmingly, don't you think?
Yes, definitely. It happened in the Assembly. 90% of the Republican Assembly people voted for it, and some of them spoke out on it, saying, they don't understand why the Senate, won't pass it. So, yes, definitely, if it came to the floor. And these Republicans, like Betty Little, recently said let the Republicans come back right now. They still control the majority. They could come back tomorrow and vote for the Child Victims Act.
And where do the different gubernatorial candidates stand on this? Has Republican Mark Molinaro said he's a supporter?
Yeah, he's supportive of it, and the governor's supportive. They all support it. All the gubernatorial candidates said they will pass it and sign it, work to have it passed.
And let's say Democrats do take the Senate, the bill comes up for a vote, the bill passes, signed into law. What happens then? What's the rollout of the Child Victims Act like? What do you envision will happen in New York?
Well, I think we have to publicize it and let victims know that it was passed, that they have a year to go into court to, and I think you'll see them do it. There'll be lawsuits brought against, the predators, the pedophiles, and some of the institutions that covered it up or enabled it. And so, yes, it will go into effect, and it'll start helping victims and start taking predators off the street immediately.
And what do you think of the criticism that's been raised regarding the look-back period and the potential for civil suits, that this is really being pushed or championed in the by the Assembly Democrats because of their close ties with trial lawyers who could theoretically stand to benefit a lot from any civil actions?
Well, I don't think that's really much of it's really nonsense. And if anyone says that these people shouldn't have a right to go into a court and go after their perpetrator and the institution, that isn't about trial lawyers. That isn't about we forget, we don't know what we're talking about. All those kind of that the Republicans have used in this state. It'll tie up the courts and all that baloney. That report destroys that, and it shows why the Child Victims Act has to pass. And if the Republicans say they're for it, as they're doing on the campaign trail, they come out for it. They send out brochures saying they're standing up for victims of child abuse. They're wrong. They haven't stood up. They've been silent.
And so you've touched on this a little bit, the people who have been abused by family members, by strangers, maybe, but basically anyone who hasn't been the victim of someone who operated under the cover of an institution. What sort of relief could those people get? Because like you said, under the Child Victims Act, there might not be an opportunity for them to get any money for counseling, for any sort of relief. So what would you want to see done for those victims?
I anticipate if the Senate, the Democrats take over the Senate majority, you will see in that bill that these all victims, every victim that's ever been abused in this state will have an opportunity to go into a court, whether they can afford a lawyer or they can't afford a lawyer.
But isn't there the potential that with some of these people, there's just you can't get water from a stone. If you're suing somebody who has no money or who's died since then, I mean, how would you get any money from them? Does a fund need to be created in addition to the opportunity for civil cases?
It should be looked at, yes. It should be looked at. But getting back to your point, like I said, a lot of victims don't want money. They just want the opportunity that you can go into a civil court and sue for $1, but you would have the opportunity to bring the person that abused you into a courtroom. It's important that victims have an opportunity. It isn't so much about the money, and so I want to see that every victim would have an opportunity to go into court. But also, yes, there should be a fund that is set up, and I think it should be set up to help victims who cannot afford therapy, who want therapy, and who need to have this to be able to move forward in their life.
Thank you so much for taking some time and walking us through this issue. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Dave. Thank you for doing it. Appreciate it.
And that's our show. I want to thank Gary for sharing his story with us. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review or spread the word on social media. You can engage with the podcast on Twitter at TUCapCon or on the Capital Confidential Facebook page. Until next time, podcast adjourned.
Just heard I tried to get you.
This day sucks.